This baby-faced 16-year-old, whose blood alcohol level was 3 times the legal limit.
Or whatever. He's doing more than 10 years on probation. So what, 20 days? So what, 128 days in county? I did that. There's nothing.
Tonight, the search is underway for a wealthy teenager who made national headlines. He's now missed a probation appointment after killing 4 people in a drunk driving crash.
Killed 4 innocent people in a drunk driving crash.
Are you gonna try to come up here? Hello, welcome back to Not All Men. Okay, every time I turn on a camera, he just feels like it's his time to shine. Decided exactly when I turned on a camera that it was your time. Like it's like you have a sixth sense for that. Okay, he decided not to join us. That's fine. Hello, welcome back to Not All Men. My name is Jerry, and this channel is me talking about true crime, toxic masculinity, and some of the things that have been sort of like bothering me on the internet. And that's what this channel is about. And today's case that I'm going to be talking about is one that I've thought about for years. In particular, it's one that happened kind of in a close proximity to where I grew up in Texas. I personally did not know the victims of this story, but I knew people who knew them. And the way that this tragedy happened, it just really pointed out how the privileged are never held accountable and how they can skirt and get around the justice system that claims that they treat everyone equally. And so that's what I'm going to be talking about in this case and what I'm going to be talking about in this video. And so without further ado, let's get started on this story. Let's get started on this case. This case will be about Ethan Couch, the Affluenza teen. America's always had a strange, contradictory obsession with wealth, one that's baked into the country's DNA. For generations, we've been told that success looks like accumulation, larger homes, faster cars, better appliances, the newest, the biggest, the best. After World War II, this idea rapidly took hold as consumerism exploded. Moving to the suburbs became a dream, and suddenly the American identity was tied to owning more and consumption. In 1958, only 4% of the households actually owned a dishwasher. Today, nearly 70% do, at least according to the statistics that I found. 70% do, but I would even suspect that that number is even larger. Vacations become more extravagant, as you would see on like social media, especially when it comes to the now added influencer culture. Vacations are no longer going to a destination spot and just, lounging under the sun and swimming a little bit. They're now full of excursions, and if you didn't film it, then it really didn't happen. A cycle took root. Earn more, spend more, want more. Repeat. Economists call it the treadmill effect, a psychological loop where no amount of consumption ever feels like enough. Americans didn't adopt consumerism, they breathed it in. But consumption on this scale has a cost, not in money, but in psychology. Because when you consistently chase the shiny things, something else slips quietly through your fingers. Advertisers learned early on that if you can manipulate desire, you can manipulate behavior. And so the average teen today sees over 1 million ads before adulthood. Ads that don't just sell products, but identities, lifestyles, and even values. It's no surprise that psychologists began to observe a new kind of emotional emptiness in privileged youths. They were surrounded by wealth, yet starving for guidance, showered in possessions, yet deprived of discipline, protected from consequences so thorough that they never developed the muscles of personal responsibility. The term affluenza started not as a joke, but as a way to explain damage that limitless privilege can do. The term describes a state where material excesses leads to entitlement, apathy, and an inability to understand that actions have consequences. For most of its life, Affluenza lived quietly in academic conversations, that is, until 2013, when tragedy in a Texas suburb would force the entire country to face it head on. On the evening of June 15th, 2013, in a peaceful neighborhood in Burleson, Texas, several families were relaxing, celebrating, or simply enjoying the kind of ordinary night you don't realize you'll never get back. Picture people hanging out with family members or celebrating birthdays, just a normal night where you're getting to have a normal night with your friends and your community. Picture something like that. The Boyles family, Eric, Holly, and their 21-year-old daughter, Shelby, spent the evening at home, eating fried chicken, watching movies, and enjoying the rare moment of quiet togetherness. Down the street, Kevin and Alicia McConnell were hosting a graduation party for their son's friend, Evan. His father, Pastor Brian Jennings, was loading folding chairs into his trunk to return to the church. He was the kind of man who lived in service to others, especially his community. And later, Kevin, who is the friend to Pastor Jennings' son, would say, "If I had to choose the last way I see Brian, that was how I'd want it." Earlier that evening, 24-year-old Brianna Mitchell had just finished her catering shift. Her car had broken down Burleson Retta Road, the rural two-lane strip locals knew well. She pulled over, frustrated and probably shaken, because I've definitely been there. It's a very scary situation when you are having car troubles and you're on the road and you're by yourself. It's a terrifying situation. But although she was frustrated, thank goodness at this time she was unharmed. When Shelby and Holly Boyles drove by, they recognized a woman stranded alone at night. And they recognized the danger of a woman being stranded on the side of the road. They stopped to help her. Shelby offered her a phone to call home. Holly helped inspect the car. And Pastor Jennings, who then saw these people on the side of the road, being the amazing, helpful man that he was, pulled over as well, offering assistance as he always did, without hesitation. A small group had formed on the side of the road that day. Ordinary people doing extraordinary things by helping those in need. Meanwhile, just a few miles away, 16-year-old Ethan Couch was hosting a party. His parents owned multiple properties, and he had effectively been left alone in a house designed for unsupervised freedom. Friends poured shots of Everclear, teenagers played beer bong. Multiple people who were at that party said later on that they had begged Ethan, and during the party, one of Ethan's friends, a young woman, had said that she wanted to go to a corner store. And people at the party saw how much that Ethan had been drinking to go to the corner store. And Ethan had offered to drive her there. And people had saw how much Ethan had been drinking. He was a pretty heavy drinker. And so they had begged him to not drive her, don't be the driver in this situation. Multiple people had begged Ethan not to drive that night. Even one girl planning to ride with him questioned the safety of getting in his truck, but he insisted he needed to take someone to a convenience store. And this decision would turn out to be one of the most deadliest decisions that could have ever been made that night. 6 teens climbed into the cab of his red Ford F-350. Now, I work for car dealerships, and an F-350 is huge. It's a very large truck. 2 more rode in the bed of the truck. A sober friend, Star Teak, hesitated, saying something didn't feel right. Later, she would tell investigators, "I wasn't comfortable. It didn't seem safe." And turns out that intuition was true. That intuition was right. Sometimes it could be really tough when you're in a situation where your intuition starts speaking to you. Intuition will start speaking to you, and you'll be in this situation, and then you'll get out of it with no problems, no issues. I definitely dealt with that when I was in college. And so I can understand the feeling of, okay, we're just going down to the corner store, it'll be okay. But then it ending in a way that you never expected. But it's also ended in a way where it wasn't like people didn't warn Ethan or didn't warn the people that were going to be in the truck. And that's not me victim blaming, but it's almost like there were signs there telling this young girl not to go, or telling people to maybe take his keys away. But unfortunately, the intuition and the warnings were not listened to. What happened next only took seconds. Ethan Couch accelerated to 70 miles per hour down the narrow road, 35 miles above the speed limit. His blood alcohol concentration would later test to 0.26, 3 times the legal limit of an adult and way above the legal limit for a minor. He was reportedly playing chicken with oncoming traffic, swerving dangerously until he lost control of the truck completely. Chicken, in case you maybe don't know with playing chicken, is you say he's driving on one side of the road. He is swerving in and out of, say it's a 2-lane road, and he's swerving in and out. So when there's oncoming traffic going his direction, he's choosing to jump in front of that oncoming car. That oncoming car will freak out and try to like get out of the way, but then he'll swerve back into the lane that he's supposed to be in to try and like play almost like a joke with the people in the car as well as the person who unwillingly is a part of this game that they didn't want to be a part of. It's a really dangerous game to play, obviously. It's also a very stupid game to play and not one that should ever happen. But that's what Ethan was doing by also being drunk and allegedly also on pills. The massive F-350 barreled off the road and plowed into a group standing by the SUV. It plowed into the SUV owned by Brianna Mitchell. The impact was, as you can guess, catastrophic. Holly and Shelby were killed instantly. Pastor Brian Jennings was thrown violently and was pronounced dead at the scene. Brianna Mitchell, already shaken from her car trouble, never had a chance to react. She too died instantly and within seconds. Now, let me reiterate this again. Behind the wheel is 16-year-old Ethan Couch, blackout drunk, allegedly high on volume, speeding at nearly 70 miles per hour. He loses control, and in a split second, lives are violently torn apart. 4 people die instantly. A youth pastor is thrown 40 yards. Shelby is found in a ditch. Holly's body is mangled, and Brianna is struck so hard that she was unrecognizable. Another boy, Sergio Molina, survives, but only technically. He is left paralyzed with permanent brain damage, needing round-the-clock care. And Ethan, he walks away. Ethan was fine. Besides some minor bumps, bruises, scrapes, he was fine. Couch's truck initially continued to move after the initial impact, smashing into Jennings' vehicle and sending it into oncoming traffic. Teenagers thrown from the truck lay scattered across the asphalt. The scene was chaos, with bodies, twisted metal, shouts for help, and the glare of the headlights in the dark. Like I mentioned, among the injured was 15-year-old Sergio Molina, who had been riding in Ethan's truck. He was ejected, landing on his neck. He survived, but doctors said he suffered one of the worst brain injuries they had ever seen. Today, Sergio is quadriplegic and minimally responsive. He cannot speak, eat, or move. His mother quit her job to care for him. His family later received civil settlement of over $2 million, a number that, yeah, might sound large, but does not scratch the surface of the lifetime care that Sergio would have to go through for the rest of his life. Now back to Ethan at the scene. Ethan Couch himself was found a quarter of a mile away, lying unconscious in a ditch, wearing only swim trunks. A local teenager approached him trying to help, and Couch told him, "I'm Ethan. I can get you out of this." He refused an ambulance, saying he couldn't afford it, even though his family made millions. Couch was charged with 4 counts of intoxication, manslaughter, and 2 counts of intoxication assault. And at first, it seemed like an open and shut case, right? Drunk driving, killed people while drunk driving, we're going to go to prison. I mean, killed 4 people. That's an open and shut type of case. He had killed 4 people. He had hospitalized several others. There was physical evidence as well as witnesses, and no ambiguity about what had happened there. But then everything changed. During the sentencing hearing, Couch's legal team introduced a psychologist named Dr. G. Dick Miller, who argued that Ethan did not understand consequences, okay? Because he had never been given any. His parents had insulated him from discipline his entire life. They bought him whatever he wanted. They set no limits for him. And because of this, the psychologist claimed that Ethan was suffering from a condition called affluenza, the emotional damage caused by growing up wealthy and privileged. So, to break that down, Ethan's not responsible for killing 4 people and sending multiple of his so called friends into the hospital. He's not responsible because he grew up wealthy and privileged. This defense was heard around the world. And even though this case seemed like one of those things that was just going to be a tragic accident, the added on defense for this young white man being like he's too privileged and wealthy to have actual consequences, it really blew up this story. And also, most people had never heard of affluenza. Like, if you say affluenza, it sounds like a disease. It sounds like something that people will get diagnosed with at the hospital, not some legal defense for a white privileged kid. Now, with that, you're probably wondering, well, who is Ethan Couch? What is his privilege? What is his background? And I'm going to go through that here. Ethan had a childhood built on wealth and lawlessness. Ethan grew up in a world where consequences just simply did not exist. His father, Fred Couch, owned Selburn. If I mess that up, I really don't care. Selburn Sheet Metal, a lucrative business that made the family millions. That's where their riches came from. So technically, self made, I guess. But Fred wasn't like the successful businessman that you would hear about in the newspapers. He had a long, ugly history of violence and run ins with the law, even up until a couple years ago. Fred has been arrested for domestic violence, including assaulting Ethan's own mother, Tanya. In one incident, he allegedly choked Tanya until she couldn't breathe. He was also charged with impersonating a police officer, complete with a fake badge and a police style equipment. Over the years, he racked up charges for theft, firearm violations, and even attacking his own employees. Don't think that Tanya, Ethan Couch's mother, doesn't also have her own rap sheet. Hers include a string of arrests for reckless behavior, including a 2003 incident where she ran a car into a man. She was charged with reckless driving, evading arrest, and violations of probation. She is volatile and sometimes violent, and deeply permissive with Ethan. Together, Fred and Tanya created an environment where their son learned one lesson: rules are negotiable, consequences are avoidable. Money can fix everything. Money can fix anything. Ethan at 13 was almost like a window into the future that he would have. One early story says it all. At 13 years old, Ethan was found driving alone illegally, because he's 13. Driving alone illegally in his father's F-350. Police confronted Fred, Ethan's father, expecting a normal parenting response. Like, I know from my family, oof, if I had been taking joyriding with my dad's Mercedes, because my dad works for Mercedes. If I had been joyriding with my dad's Mercedes, there would have been at 13. Oh my gosh. At 13, I don't think I would have been able to, like, I'd still be under punishment. I'd still be punished to this day if I drove off in one of my parents' cars. And I'm not laughing because it's funny. I'm just laughing at just how crazy it is to even think about that. I mean, yes, of course, when you're a teenager, you do stupid stuff. But like, I just feel like his parents just like really didn't care. Like, to be found joyriding in your dad's F-350. But it's a very large truck to be like a 13-year-old just cruising around in it. Crazy. Which I do know some people say that, like, oh, we lived out in the country and like my grandpa would let me like drive the wheel while he was like the one controlling like the brake and the accelerator. And like, I've heard those stories, sure. But it's always the people being like, yeah, but we were like out in the country, as in like roads were like not the suburbs or not like in the city. Like, this is like out in the middle of nowhere. And they were driving on 2-lane roads and there's not a whole lot of traffic that comes through, like, or it's on a dirt road. That was I've heard people talk about that, especially living in the South. Quite a few people have those experiences. But this is way above that. Wasn't in there with an adult controlling the brake and the accelerator. He was there by himself as a 13-year-old in his father's F-350. And do you want to know what his father's reaction was? Fred told them bluntly, I do what I want. So the cops came to him and said, your 13-year-old child was driving around illegally in your F-350. Are you going to do something about that? Are you going to punish him, make him go to bed early or something? And he literally says, I do what I want. Which, like, if you don't want to tell the cops your punishment, that's fine. Cops don't need to know everything. But, it's just such an odd response of people who, it's just such an odd response. Instead of an actual punishment for this situation, Ethan was pulled out of school and even given more freedom. No structure, no discipline, no boundaries. So that gives you a look into the Couch family and the way that privilege and money have been able to assist them in their BS, and never hold them accountable for it. Now, back to the case. The prosecution asked for 20 years in prison for Ethan. Judge Jean Boyd instead sentenced Ethan Couch to 10 years probation and treatment at a luxury rehabilitation facility that cost his parents nearly $500,000. By the way, if you hear screaming, that's my cat. I had to close the door because he was being a little bit too needy, and I had to close the door. So if you hear light meows, that's my cat. He received no jail time for killing 4 people. To many, the message was unmistakable. If you're wealthy enough, consequences do not apply to you. And I feel that anytime there is a wealthy, privileged person in the news, like Diddy or Chris Brown or Harvey Weinstein or Bill Cosby, there's always this feeling that although they have been called out for the monster that they are, true consequences, true consequences that would happen to anyone else won't hit them. And that's the part that's the most frustrating is you want to have this feeling that the justice system is going to get the bad guys, but really they only get the quote unquote bad guys that aren't wealthy and privileged. The public's reaction was explosive. People were shocked. People were shocked, then furious. Memes and headlines mocked rich kid defense. Parents of the victims called the ruling a disgrace, and it is. News outlets questioned the legal ethics. And even Dr. Miller, the guy, the psychologist in the beginning who brought up this whole affluenza BS, the very psychologist the who introduced the term to the court later said he regretted even being involved. Well, it's a little too late for that. Anyway, at the time that I had heard this case, I was in college or was I? At the time that I had heard this case, I was living in Texas. And again, I had never heard of the case until the word affluenza had been used as a defense in it. And I was just shocked. I was shocked that something like that could be an actual diagnosis and they can actually be used as a defense legally. But tragedy didn't end there. 2 years later, a video surfaced of Ethan Couch with friends, surrounded by beer and allegedly drinking, and of course, violating his probation. His mother, Tanya Couch, withdrew $30,000 from a bank, and the two fled to Mexico, where they hid in a resort town until they were caught. Ethan was eventually sentenced to 720 days in jail. Not for killing 4 people. No, not for killing 4 people, but for violating probation. So he didn't go to jail for killing 4 people. He violated probation. And that's how he got 720 days in jail, which is still not enough. Still not enough. And also, again, I'm not laughing at the situation. I'm laughing at how ridiculous this is. I remember I had written an article for my local newspaper when I was in college. I had written an article about Ethan Couch when he had gone on the run. And I think I had wrote it like after he was caught or something. But I remember looking at like the news about it and stuff like that. And like, I know talking about people's looks is like a very cheap thing to do, but like, I'm gonna do it in this situation. So if you don't like that, just skip this part. I think it was a crazy idea to dye his hair black, but then like leave the rest of his face the exact same. Like the only like That's the only thing they changed about him to disguise him, was to turn his hair like black. That was his only disguise. Like he still had the blonde beard, the blonde eyebrows. He looked the exact same, just like an emo, just emo. That was their disguise for Ethan. His mom also, I don't think she changed her hair either. So it was just like, oh, we're gonna dye his hair black. And like, they'll never know it's us. And also, they escaped to a resort. A resort. They were like, you know, I mean, if you're gonna go on the run, I'm not giving you tips to go on the run, okay? But if you're gonna go on the run, my first thought, if I'm ever, hopefully never, on the run for like skip like probation, like skipping out on consequences for being recorded drinking alcohol, and I'm like on the run, I'm not gonna go to a resort. I know that maybe like a place where I'd want to go, right? I'd want to go to a resort because, I don't know anything about Mexico. But like that would be the last place that I would go. I would try to find some destination that is just like remote and like not a whole lot of people are there and not a whole lot of people visit this place. And not a whole lot of people visit this place, and I can just completely be like alone in a house, unsuspecting, like somewhere out nowhere. But no, him and his mom chose a resort town because even then, even though they're on the run even though they're on the run, they still have to be privileged. They still have to have their privileges, even though they're on the run. His mother, in this situation of her helping her son dodge consequences, was also charged. And she's had surprisingly, a multiple arrests since, including a drug test failure and allegations of fleeing law enforcement. His father, Fred Couch, like I said before, was also later arrested for impersonating. This is also around the same time that a couple years later, Fred Couch, Ethan Couch's father, was arrested for impersonating a police officer. This was after Ethan had served his time and after I think his mom had served his time. So this was like the most recent Couch arrest, I believe, was Fred Couch impersonating a police officer and domestic violence. The entire Couch family demonstrated a pattern of entitlement, lawlessness, and avoidance of actual accountability. And the parents passed that on to their son. And yet, even after this, many felt Ethan still faced fewer consequences the average American teenager of color would face of a lesser crime. And that's the unspoken layer of affluenza. It's a relationship to race and class. Would a black teen who killed 4 people while drunk driving ever walk out of court with just probation? In the United States, absolutely not. I can't speak for other countries, but in the United States, absolutely not. Black people have been, especially black boys, have been sent to prison for crimes that they didn't even commit or sent to prison for quote unquote stealing a backpack. Would a Latino teen be sent to rehab before he was sent to prison? I don't think so. Would a poor teen, even a poor white teen, be told he was too deprived to understand consequences, that him being poor and deprived of food or shelter made him unwilling or unable to understand consequences? No. Study after study shows racial bias in sentencing. Affluenza wasn't just a defense, it was a mirror showing how America's justice system treats the wealthy and white. And surprisingly, when I was doing my research, this case isn't unique. The If I mess this up, I really don't care either. DuPont, the DuPont heir, Robert H. Richards IV, sexually assaulted his 3-year-old daughter and received probation because the judge believed he wouldn't do well in prison. He wouldn't do well in prison. Does anyone do well in prison? Repeat myself. Does anyone do well in prison? Is there like a thing? I mean, like, sure, there are education programs within the prison system or whatever, but like, does anyone do well in prison? That's the point of prison. You're not supposed to be doing well. Well, as a point of the current prison system, you're not supposed to be doing well. Other cases used bizarre, again, not laughing at the situation, laughing at the ridiculousness. Other cases used bizarre defenses like Twinkies and PMS, auto brewery disorder. That was really interesting. If you want me to talk about any of these other cases of these wacky defenses being used after this person has murdered someone, let me know. And many other defendants also held money, status, or social power. So all those defenses that I just named off of also were used to people who had money and power. So when we are talking about affluenza, we're talking about a pattern. America protects the wealthy, even when their actions devastate others. We're seeing that now with the Epstein case. I know it's not it's different, but if the wealthy and powerful weren't on that quote unquote list or in those documents, if it was just regular people who don't have money and lawyers and big stakes and things, I don't know. I don't think that we would have had to have waited forever to get any of the information that we've been getting. Um, it's almost like when things become so big that they cannot ignore, that's when finally wealthy people are held accountable. Poor people go to jail. Poor people go to jail for stealing food. Rich people avoid jail for killing people. Wealth becomes a shield that victims' families never get. Because while Ethan Couch moved through the courts and rehab facilities and international headlines, the families of the four victims were left with emptiness no amount of money can fix. Eric Boyles lost his wife and daughter in the same night. The Jennings family lost a husband, father, and pastor. The Mitchells lost a daughter who was simply headed home for work. And Sergio Molina's life was irreversibly shattered, and his family will spend the rest of their lives caring for him. They received no probation, no luxury rehab, and no second chance because Ethan Couch took that away. My light just went out, so we're going to do this without the light. Affluenza isn't a diagnosis. It's a cultural failure, a symptom of society that worships the wealthy and punishes the vulnerable. It reveals how deeply privilege is embedded in our courts, our media, our values, our understanding of justice. And by the way, if you see me looking down, I'm looking at my notes, okay? The Ethan Couch case wasn't about one teenager. It was about a system that bends for the wealthy and breaks the poor. It's about a country that excuses harmful behavior when the perpetrator has the right last name, the right skin color, and the right bank account number. America doesn't just tolerate privilege, it protects it, even when it kills. And until that changes, affluenza or any of these other BS excuses will continue to spread, not as a psychological condition, but as a cultural disease. And again, I'm only speaking for America because I live in America and I don't feel like I have the right to talk about other countries. I do know that America is not unique at the fact that it protects its wealthy and protects its privilege. And I do know America is not the only country that does that, but I just sometimes feel like I don't have the education enough to speak on other countries. So, speaking for America, this is a huge problem here. Today, Ethan Couch is an adult. I believe he's in his late 20s. He stays mostly out of the spotlight, understandably so, trying to rebuild a life that he destroyed, trying to rebuild a life he almost destroyed and did destroy for so many others. But his legacy remains a stain. People still talk about affluenza, um, not as much these days. I think that it was just one of those things where people had just never heard of this word before. And so when it was used in this case, it just like blew up. And I haven't really heard people talk about it much recently, but people still talk about it as it explains something bigger. The idea that wealth can insulate children so thorough that morality becomes optional. You see this almost a little bit with social media. Like, you see people who on social media who have immense power and immense wealth and immense access will do certain things and they know that they're not going to get in trouble for it, or they know they're not going to face real consequences for it. And so they just do it because they can. There's no reason, no rhyme or reason why. They just do it because they can. We see this all the time on, especially with the rise of social media. But the truth is simpler and darker. Ethan wasn't a victim of affluenza. He was a product of entitlement, of parents who broke the law and escaped consequences, of a system that bends for the wealthy and snaps for everyone else. And the lesson America walked away with is chilling. Accountability in this country isn't just about guilt, it's about class, it's about status, it's about privilege. And the Ethan Couch case, it was never about, again, it was never about affluenza. It was about America looking directly into a mirror and not liking what it saw. And that's it for this episode of Not All Men. This case has always been very frustrating. To me, I think it was the first time I really recognized the way that the system will protect those who are wealthy and privileged in any means necessary. And of course, many people, it was like as a child, as like a teenager, like coming to like, oh wow, we really are going to go to the ends of the earth to protect the white privileged wealthy kid who was never wanted for anything in his life. Like, that's how far we're going to go. And since then, it's just been happening over and over again. I also think about that those two teen boys who recently, they're like, it's two separate cases, but recently they were accused and pretty much found guilty of sexually assaulting these young girls. One girl who was like a 7-year-old, and both of them aren't facing jail time or not facing real consequences. And it's just crazy how, even with so much coverage of true crime cases and coverage of, the harm that happens to survivors and victims, that there were still to this day judges and that out there who believe that these wealthy white boys still deserve more protection than the victims themselves. Yeah, this case to me is something that I really wanted to discuss because I remember seeing Facebook posts of Sergio, one of the victims, the one who is quadriplegic. One of my friends on Facebook had shared a photo of him and was praying for him, and it's just devastating to see how this one stupid decision changed the course of so many people's lives. Not only the victims, but their families, their community, everyone's. And yeah, that's why I chose to talk about it. Uh, yeah, that's all I have for this episode. Hopefully you'll like and subscribe. Definitely subscribe. I really appreciate all of the support. Um, and yeah, I will see you another time for another video. And thank you for spending your time with me and hearing about this case. I really appreciate it. And hope you have a lovely day. Bye.